Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. Hello on the live stream to people watching. We have a wonderful panel here with a lot of very active people on social media, so therefore I assume that we have a far bigger audience outside of this room, and also to you out there. Hello and welcome to the Global Media Forum. Our panel today is called Underreported, Showing and Challenging Inequalities in the Media. I would love to introduce you very briefly to my honorable guests. First of all, thank you so much for coming, Vice Minister Virgilio Zeriche Riola from Equatorial Guinea. Thank you so much for being here. That's a great honor to have you here on the panel. I will give you a short moment after the introductory round to introduce yourself and to tell us a little bit what you expect from this panel today. Then I have to my right a wonderful colleague originally from Venezuela, Emilia Diaz-Struck. She's with the International Center for Investigative Journalism that gained worldwide reputation just during the last 3 years after they have published the Panama Papers together with a media tanker here in Germany, the Süddeutsche Zeitung. But the project was far bigger, and Emily is ready to give you some insights on that. Again, to my right is Fabienne Hurst. She is a freelance journalist working for our network ARD, several regional stations. 2 of them actually she used to have her apprentice with NDR, which is our partner station in the north of Germany. And just recently she finished, together with a group of other journalists, a documentary series called Docupy, and she was responsible in particular for promoting these documentaries on social media. I'm very honored as well to welcome Abdi Hakim Einte. He's a consultant he works as a consultant in Somalia in particular, a country that is, besides stories about pirates and other issues, really underreported, especially in the West, in Europe and elsewhere, and we are going to talk about this as well. Thanks so much for coming again. I'm very pleased and honored to have you all here on the table. And I would like to start with a short introductory round, to give everybody the chance to outline a little bit what he and she is working on at the moment, to give you a picture of their work in particular. I would like to start, ladies first, if you don't mind, Vice Minister, with Emily Diaz-Struck. Emily, if you could outline a little bit what's the core of your work at this point at the moment.
Yeah, so the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists focus on global stories of global impact. And since 1997, basically our core work has been working with journalists all around the world. So we believe in local journalists, so we don't believe in parachuting journalists. So we basically, in all our projects, we involve local journalists to report on the global stories. So our model is based on radical sharing. So everyone shares their own findings and then has the editorial independence to publish the stories that they consider are the most important stories for their own country. So we have global stories with the local views too. So, and we have a wide range of journalists and all that. And the topics we have covered in the past years, like involved a lot of offshore deals, so which is complicated to translate to the audience, and that has been one of the challenges, and I think we have become better at that. But the offshore deals are one of the causes of inequalities. So it's one of the ways in which you can address the causes of the problem. So at some point, it's like empowering journalists by working at a global scale with the best investigative journalists all around, with so many diverse and different skills, different backgrounds, but the best sources. But at the same time, doing that, covering topics that tackle and the society is really affected by those topics. And we do that actually innovating. We do that by creating our own platforms and resources so that our journalists are able and capable of sharing their findings in a secure way and mine millions of documents and explore them to be able to really make sense of that. So that is like a short summary that covers the topics we cover, the type of work we do, but also that we always care about the audience and the public interest.
Emily, excellent. Thank you so much for that brief presentation. I would like to give you, Fabienne, the word now, if you just could outline a little bit what's in the center of your work during the last, I think it's about almost 2 years now that you were occupied by Docupy.
No, it was actually, we started last year, and we are a group of journalists and filmmakers, and we wanted to occupy one subject for a certain time, 6 months. And because we didn't want to just tell one story, but we really wanted to understand and make understandable one big issue, an issue that we all cared about. And the first project was about inequality, and we called it Ungleichland, which is German, and it means inequality land, and which is a very abstract subject actually, but something that everybody is concerned about. And so we separated it into 3 aspects, into inequality of wealth, inequality of life chances, and of political power. And we produced 3 documentaries and 1 best-of for TV. But we also wanted to reach a new audience, people who usually don't watch documentaries, especially not about inequality, something as abstract as inequality. So we tried to make that subject more sexy, more interesting, and more consumable. So we started a campaign, a social media campaign, from the very beginning. Which we produced internet clips for YouTube and for Twitter and for Facebook and for Instagram, and we decided not to publish it on our website. There is a website, www.docupy.de, but we tried to be, or we wanted to be, from the very beginning. We didn't want to promote our own website. That nobody knew, of course, but we cooperated from the very beginning with very popular German websites, like Spiegel Online, like Zeit Online, Weiß or Tagesschau, and also their social media accounts. So what we were kind of like a seeding platform. We had the seed, and we distributed it to other platforms to make that, to reach a maximum of readers and spectators, a maximum of an audience that usually doesn't consume documentaries. So and that was actually very successful because we convinced the WDR to kind of let go that kind of the idea of really, how to call it, really sit on that something. Like they really were open enough to give the material away, but we created a very strong market. No, not the market. Not the market.
Brand.
A brand. Sorry, my English. A very strong brand that could be, that people would kind of connect with. So that was pretty successful. At the end, we had in total almost 7 million views for our videos, and 1.5 million views on YouTube for the documentaries, and 3 million on TV. So we were really happy that actually at the end it kind of worked out. Thank you.
Excellent, Fabienne. Thank you very much. I think to understand the quality and what this documentary project brought up in such a rich country like Germany is maybe you need to understand that the gap between rich and poor, like elsewhere in Europe as well, is getting also in this rich country bigger, and this is something that was shown very intensely in several series and also in testimonials online. Vice Minister, thank you again for being here. I would like to give you also the word to outline a little bit the core issues of your current work. You are in office just recently. What are your biggest issues you want to challenge in the months to come?
Buenos días a todos. Bueno, me van a disculpar porque estoy el problema del inglés. Pero bueno,
it's difficult to talk English for me, but I think that maybe you can understand me. And we have a way to talk English in our zone, but it's not really English, the proper English. It's pidgin English. If I would talk English, this way of English here, we wouldn't understand. Therefore, I would prefer to talk English, Spanish. I would like to outline our communication media, which I represent. I am a member of a radio and TV channel, a national radio TV channel, and we have a way of working which is based on proximity to the audience. So we make journalism for the audience, and our main objectives are an information which is objective, transparent, and we do our best also to avoid sensationalism. And I think it's a challenge, a national challenge, and it's very important to be very objective. I'd like also to well, I want also to say that I appreciate it very much that for the first time Guinea can participate in this forum, and well, this topic of inequalities is very important in our point of view, and in our country we think that the professionals of the communication media are, so to say, in a phase where these inequalities, these social inequalities are, in a way or other, absorbing the professionalism of the traditional media. Therefore, we are now trying to make a kind of legislation how to use the social media in a responsible way in order that we have a good coverage. And this forum gives us an opportunity to realize, so to say, and more objective information.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much indeed. Abdi Hakim, I would like to give you the word, and maybe we start already with a question. How are you challenging how international media are reporting about your home country, Somalia, and what is the core of your work at the moment?
Thank you so much, Frank. And first of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's such a great to be joining a panel with great guests from different backgrounds. I think my name is Abdi. I'm from Somalia, and I think I would like to start off at a personal anecdote in terms of why I, now. Before I talk about the challenge and then what we do back home in Somalia, I think I started going back to Somalia early 2009. And this was at the height of the pirates, when the pirates were actually, hijacking tankers in every single day, pretty much every week. So I was just traveling on plane with a guy from Greek. And this time around, the pirates, they were hijacking a big tanker from Greek. So as we seated on the plane, we just started exchanging conversation. And when I told him that I'm from Somalia, he looked like he just gave to me such a cold face. And he said, okay, do you notice that the pirates are now hijacking a Greek tanker? And I said, how is that my problem? and then we just finally we ended up having a good conversation. It was actually a rather blunt but a very frank exchange. And it is actually this kind of background where, I mean, the kind of situation that you constantly and every day live on if you are a country that is deeply marginalized and stereotyped to different problems and different ills. So I started then working with the government by then, which literally had to control a few blocks, actually a couple of blocks, and half of the city was just run by Al-Shabaab, and the entire city was just decimated. And for me, I just left the country when I was young, and I couldn't remember. I only used to see Somali pictures on screens, on CNNs, how things looked like. And when I went back, you know, I just saw complete destruction of the entire city. And the government was just only controlling half of these buildings. And then started working with the government, and things actually came down easily. And then, you know, finally Shabab has been pushed out from the city, which is the capital city of Mogadishu. And the government was finally able to control the entire city of Mogadishu, which I think is about twice the size of Bonn, if not bigger. You know, so working with the government for me was at some point, because I had a nice job where I lived, which is in the US, and I abandoned my job just to go back to the country and do whatever I could, because I could not withstand the pictures and the informations that I was just watching and seeing on the news. So, you know, working with the government, as always, it's been very difficult, because you always just push a paper. They always talk. There's no talk the walk. Everything is just a plain paper. And then, you know, finally, Somali diasporas have actually begun going back to the country. And I was actually among the very few earlier who've braved in to come back. But over the time, we just have more than, I don't know, probably, you know, by 100,000 close to Somali diasporas now returning to help rebuild and recover the country from conflict. So it is actually against this backdrop we launched what would be the first innovation hub in Somalia. It's called an iRise Hub. It's a technology innovation hub, and the idea is basically to give a platform to local young entrepreneurs, journalists, coders, and future people who belong to the future, not us. So we're actually providing them and giving various different type of services and support that they need, so that they can challenge and reclaim their narratives. You know, I mean, for us, I mean, the diaspora generations, we can challenge with the mainstream media in terms of how they report and how they cover Somalia. But also, I think what we need to do at the end of the day is just enable the local peoples, especially the young, those who were entrapped in the country, who could not, who were unable to, you know, get out of the country. So we're now at this stage of really helping them and trying to help them reclaim their narrative, so that they are the ones who just take control of their stories, and their stories will not be told by mainstream media, by BBC or CNN or whatever. These stories will be told by the Somalis themselves instead of non-Somalis. So that's just one anecdote, but I think we can have a more interactive conversation as we go along.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Abdi. I would like to ask you, Emily, coming from what Abdi Hakim just said, the ICIJ, and especially the project about the Panama Papers, the strength of it was that you brought together big media, mainstream organizations, like you just mentioned, Abdi Hakim, together with local journalists in particular countries. So we were discussing just earlier that suddenly there were moments you had somebody asking something from Asia, and the response came from the other side of the world, somewhere in Southern America. Can you explain us a little bit how that worked, and what the benefits for both sides were of such an organization and such a to work in that way?
Yeah, well, I think that helps raising the standards of journalism, and I was impressed by the level of collaboration and the maturity and the ways people were sharing. So because it's not that you had like big media and you had big media in different parts of the world, but you also had at the same time startups, like journalists in countries like mine, where like the media outlets were bought and like all the independent journalists suddenly moved online. So they all created their own websites. And you had 11 Venezuelan journalists working together, investigating Venezuelan stories. So it was at that level, like you had the best investigative journalists, but it was a matter of the people. You had to have the right people. So these were journalists who were not lone wolves. These were journalists who were able to leave their egos aside. And suddenly we had a platform online, which is called the Global iHub. So technology facilitates this, otherwise this wouldn't be possible. And there we conveyed more than 380 journalists who were interacting 24 hours, like because you had people all around the world. So yes, we had a colleague in Ecuador investigating Chinese contracts, and that connected to the Netherlands. So basically they had the best sources in their own countries. So they shared in the Global iHub, hey, I found this lead about this contractor in my country, but actually the shareholders are connected to the Netherlands. So what do you know about these people? And then the Dutch colleagues jumped in, and it doesn't matter like to which media they work for. Like they just wanted to share with other colleagues, with other peers, reporters that share the same principles. So they just jump in and said, oh yes, I got these sources, I found this information, here are more documents. And then they start connecting the dots. And that way you have a story at that global scale.
We want to talk about the underreported. Following the Panama Papers, the world has discussed a lot about corruption, oligarchism, and other effects of the big money at this point. What is your, what did you bring up to report about the victims of corruption and the victims of this money machine?
Yeah, I said at the beginning that we have learned a lot because our first offshore project was actually offshore leaks. And then we just told the stories about the money, but we figured out we need to tell the stories about the victims. And that was one of the biggest changes with Panama Papers. We had a special video animation called Victims of Offshore, where we highlighted examples about people in different parts of the world who could be affected. So, for instance, the use of offshore by gun traffickers. And then like how that affects people who are suffering the war. So then you have how that offshore deal that is legal helps us doing some activities that are actually affecting people. So the secrecy, unveiling the secrecy, but at the same time, how are you affected? And it wasn't such a level that you had people after Panama Papers going out and demonstrating on the streets in several parts of the world, including Iceland, for instance, where people asked for the resignation of their prime minister. So that connected directly with the people. And that is like the way of like, how do you change the storytelling so that you still tell the complex story, but you also are able to connect with your audience and see how are they affected by these stories.
Fabienne, what did you learn in the course of the last year about storytelling, using social media and covering the poor, which you did in the documentary series? What did you learn during the last year?
What do you mean by covering the poor?
Well, I mean, the documentary, Docupy, is about the gap of living in a rich country like Germany. So again, my question is, what did you learn about bringing people through social media into the public that probably were not before?
Well, we did, yeah. When we talk about inequalities in Germany, everybody thinks about the gap between the very poor and the very rich, but that's nothing new. Actually, that's something that is, in my opinion, over-reported. Everybody knows it. Nobody does something against it, and everybody wants equality of chances, for example. But actually, nobody does something for it, or not enough. So we decided to not only to look at this gap between the very rich and the very poor, and we started to look at the middle class as well, because the middle class in Germany is now is now trying to build a new border between the lower middle class, a new border between them and the very poor. So they used everything. They create tricks, and they use every trick to, especially their children, to take their children away from the environment where they would meet and play and learn together with poor kids, and create their own schools, their own private schools, and they move in better neighborhoods. That's something that I didn't know, actually, or not to this extent, actually, because you always think, yeah, it's not that bad, and everybody plays together, and we are so equal in Germany, and everybody has the same rights, but that's not true. When you live in a good neighborhood, you have better chances than somebody that lives in an underprivileged neighborhood. And to show that via media, if it's social media or TV or newspaper, whatever, it is so hard, because people, they don't want to know about that, because people who read the newspapers, they are often from a more privileged background, and so that's the main issue, to tell people that actually they are the problem too, without being like this, without being like you're the bad guys, but to create more of an open-mindedness towards that, and to realize, to make people realize that actually that this is the problem. It's not only the very poor and the very rich, but also themselves, and that's what we tried actually to make people think about that.
Can you give us some examples what came out of this? That suddenly a neighbor sees his own neighbor in social media being presented?
It's very hard to kind of describe it and not showing it on screen. But what we did, for instance, was we invited two schools. One school from a better neighborhood in a city, from the south of Essen, it's a city in
North Rhine-Westphalia, the land where we are in here in Bonn.
Yeah, and from the south of Essen, and one school from the north of Essen. We brought them together in a sport Halle, in a room, in a big room, and we asked them to ask each other questions and what they wanted to know about it, and what about themselves, each other, and we had two circles on the floor, and one said yes, and one circle said no, and then they asked each other questions, and the pupils from the north of Essen, which is an underprivileged neighborhood, they asked immediately, Are you German, or are your parents German? And then 100% of the pupils from the north, they said yes, and they from the south, they said no. So they realized that actually, we realized that there is a difference even in one city, and they wanted to know about their differences. And at the end of the day, they started to connect and to talk to each other. But actually, they are separated, and we have cities where poor and richer people are not only rich but richer from a more privileged neighborhood. They are separated, and they don't see each other anymore. And we have studies. We work together with the WZB in Berlin, which is a sociological research center, and they made at the same time they made a new study which said that segregation in German cities and bigger German cities rose in every city. The segregation rose in the past 10 years, and I didn't know that. And like for these 8 months where we were thinking and did all that research, we sat there and was like, we didn't know that. So how can we make people think about that, and how can we show them? And so we created different clips and stories about that.
Okay, thank you very much. Vice Minister, you come from a very traditional media. You were a famous TV person before you went to office, before you became Vice Minister. How is this digital age and, of course, social media changing a society like yours these days?
Sí, muchas gracias. Como lo ha dicho, efectivamente.
Thank you, yes. As you just said, I used to work for the mainstream media, for very traditional media.
But at this very moment, we are actually experiencing the digital era, and our society is changing decisively. We are in the midst of a process, of a modernization process of media, communication means. We are going we're getting into the digital television. This is a very important project, and we are already into the second phase of this project. And I'm sure that we are going to have a very broad spectrum, and we will also include other means. We also have other projects that have to do with all kinds of media. We are changing the equipment of all the means because we want them all to be digital. We live in a society that at this moment is getting used to using social forums and social nets. The social forums nowadays are attracting the attention of especially our youth. Young people are incredibly interested in these means, and they are now incredibly into these new means. And we realize that radio and television are now in second place for all these people, especially for young people, because they are now interested in the new social forums and social media. We are living in a society where the communication means can play a very important role, definitely. We have special programs, but we are still working with traditional media. We are trying to have communication be the main protagonist of everything we do. We are in a society that is now in a process of evolution. We are adapting to new ways of life. We are coming from very, very traditional means, very monopolized traditional means, and we are now going into more pluralized means. So you can actually, we are working as responsible as possible, but the one thing that really worries me, nevertheless, is that there is a very bad understanding about journalism and journalists, and it seems as if now journalists do not want to respect the traditional norms. Now journalism seems to be just talking about what is happening, what's going on, and these social forums are turning us into lazy people, because we rely on that information, the information that not necessarily has to be reality. This is a problem that we have in our society, especially not only in Ecuador, but also in the whole continent, Latin American continent. Right now, at government level, we are going through a very different process. We are trying to draw new laws so that we can work with the resources that we have in a more responsible manner. This is actually what is happening in Ecuador right now.
Brings me back to Abdi Hakim.
Gracias. Si algunos de ustedes, alguna persona tenga
and just go for it. We are very happy to enter a discussion with you in a short moment. Abdi Hakim, the Vice Minister just mentioned that the changes in his country, with his society, when it comes to this process of digitalization. How do you think will what we see now change an image international media painting? You just mentioned the pirates a couple of years ago, when all of international media were focusing especially on this issue. How will this reshape an image internationally of a society like yours?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think, you know, the societies are evolving and changing, primarily because of the arrival of technology. I think the technology is really and fundamentally challenging with mainstream media, or the so-called traditional media that we usually consume before. So, so what you now see is that the social media is the big brother. It's just watching everything, and if the traditional media, you know, tries to portray a negative story, immediately you will have a backlash that's coming from the Somali people and from other.
Do you have an example, maybe?
Yeah, there is a case about 2 years ago, or not 2 years, I think 3 years ago, a BBC reporter just came to Mogadishu to cover a book fair story in Somalia. And she wrote an excellent article. I just read her article. I mean, she wrote quite a nice article. But she published the story with an image of Al-Shabaab in front of it. So the story went into the public and actually was published and posted on BBC. And
but
then
it was a story about a book fair.
It was about a story of the book fair. It's pretty much like Germany having a book fair and has a Hitler on the front page. And imagine the backlash that it would immediately generate. And then it hugely attracted a huge backlash from social media, and we organized a hashtag. And then the hashtag spreaded like a wildfire.
What was the hashtag like?
Well, the hashtag called Someone Tell BBC. So, so it actually went very viral, and everybody was just sharing and here until finally BBC retrieved the image and issued an apology and said, we're really sorry to use that. It was an editorial error. We should have done it better. So that's the kind of a lazy journalism I think the minister was just talking about earlier. I think it's very important that we really not to underestimate the importance of having a citizen journalism in challenging with the stereotypes and with the underrepresentation and underreporting stories. So this is exactly what we're doing at our Innovation Hub, trying to enable and give the opportunity and platforms for future generations so that they can reclaim their stories. They don't have to sit and wait the BBC to call and CNN and be featured. They have the power in hands. Of course, the technology has its downside and it can be challenged. But I would say, you know, the technology has really enabled people to really challenge with the mainstream media, especially in a way that has never seen before. So I think that's one thing that we are really looking at. But however, generally, I would say the media has for a long time been quite biased when it comes to covering conflict situations, because they really look the story in a single dimension. They don't have to take this story from different perspectives, because I understand news medias are first and foremost a business houses. So they like to attract to their audience, and whatever they can, and however they can attract their business, they will definitely do it. So, so we need to also keep that in mind, that the news organizations or the BBCs or whatever, they primarily exist as a business platforms rather than a news telling or storytelling things. I would also like to touch upon the story of inequality. The inequality that you mentioned, which is the rich versus poor. I think in our countries, you have a different inequality, inequality that largely involves people who are, you know, an overwhelming majority have very little access to public informations. Things like basic information in terms of what government, what kind of policies are in place, what kind of legal issues are in place. So people are largely unaware of the very public information that they have the right to know it. So we have a huge gap, a huge inequality when it comes to accessing to the public information and the private. And this is something that also we also need to be looking at. I mean, we don't have the rich versus poor you know, pattern in Africa. We have what we call in Somalia those who profited from the war. So we call war profiteers, and those who did not profit from the war, which are the very poor people. So there's that, you know, type of disparity, and not in terms of wealth, but in terms of the very fundamental rights, which is the information of knowing your rights. What does the Constitution say about X issue and the issues? So these are the kind of inequalities and disparities we have.
Abdi Hakim, you are forming a group of 30 young people at the moment, and you will train them for about a year, as far as I understood you, 30 young people to become citizen journalists.
Exactly.
What would you like to see to happen after this year? What do you think will be important for them to report about?
Well, I think they will definitely be reporting what issues and stories that are important to them. Things like, I mean, how can they really challenge with these deeply stereotypic stories and portrayals by the international media?
Like pirates.
Like pirate, terrorism, poverty, war, conflict, everything. It's all these the mass things that you can... I mean, even you go to the extent that even if you put Somali on Google, and if you take Somali and put Somali on Google, the first things that will pop up is a bad image. And I personally challenge this with the people in Google.
Shall we try this?
Yeah, you can just try. And then go to the image. That's what you have. There you go.
Okay.
So I think this was largely a production of the mainstream media. It was not a production by Somalis themselves. So the next generation, they have to challenge with this content. How can they alter and change this content and have a positive-oriented content? And this is exactly what we're trying to do.
Like what? What could this be in future?
Well, because the Google works in an algorithmic type of way. So the more positive pictures you upload, the better it will have. So what they can do is that they can populate the search engine through posting a lot of pictures, through sending different clips to mainstream media, to social media and stuff like that. And if they populate a lot of pictures, I don't know, but Google was just telling us if you put like a couple of hundred pictures a day on Google search engine, probably it will outweigh the pictures that are already in the search engine. So this is a long way. It cannot be done. It cannot be undone overnight. So this is exactly what we're trying to do with. We're trying to help with young, young entrepreneurs and journalists to reclaim and challenge these stories because it is affecting them on a constant and daily basis. And this is exactly what they live up to. It's now even affecting. At a personal level, I mean, imagine if you're just traveling around the world and you get to ask a question of you come from Somalia and then you immediately identified or stereotyped with an X problem. Imagine, I mean, if you're German and we travel to, Belgium or Brussels, you say, oh, you're from Nazi. Think about that with the mental impact that it could have. That's exactly the sort of feelings and challenge that we're really looking at.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that insight. Emily, citizen journalism is an issue also in Europe. We talk about this very often at the moment. Many people are starting workshops to engage people to use social media more professionally than it's been done until today. What do you think? How can this change investigative journalism and what you are doing?
Well, there are some interesting experience on crowdsourcing, for instance. But on one side, like investigative journalists follow a methodology, and it requires time. So you need to document, and you need to be able to trace and follow the money. And it comes to uncover things that are usually hidden to the public eye, and are like values, like it could be illegal, it could be something that goes against values. So citizens could be a great point of sourcing, and it could be a great point. I know there is an interesting project in the US that it was about maternal health, maternal issues, women dying, and most of the sources they got were doing an open call. So now we have in our organization an engagement editor, like that it's not only that engages with the audience, that includes citizen journalists. But I foresee like the type of work we do, it allows us to connect the dots to, it's like modern cartographers, like things are very complex. So citizen journalists play a role in reporting daily stuff, like problems that are in society, but on the other hand, you still need the methodology and you need that background for the investigative journalist. So I think there are like great opportunities, but also we need to keep in mind the sustainability, the business models, and like how what is investigative journalism and what is citizen journalism. Sometimes they can help each other, but I think each one has its own place.
And there's a lot of there are a lot of lies out there in the world of social media as well. How do you challenge them?
Plenty of rumors, which is one of the things. So because that's part of our work, is verifying the information, and it's not in one single place. So when you see like the massive things that go out through social media, yes, like how many of those are rumors? How do you fact check? So you can get interesting leads, but then you need to go to public records and find the documents. You need to go to other sources and verify the information. So then that is the next step investigative journalists need to do, because social network people freely express what they're seeing, what they're watching, what is going on in their lives, and then they move on. But investigative journalists, until we're able to publish a story, we go through so many steps, and that involves all the fact-checking. So we are not just reacting based on what is going on in second by second in the social networks, but we are investigating and connecting the dots. And leads could start from there, but yeah, we need to do all the other work.
Okay. Can you give us a little bit more insights about, let's start with the Panama Papers, Swiss leaks. Could you explain us a little bit how all that came up and what kind of effects you had at the end of the day?
Yeah, so these projects, and well, we have worked in leaked and non-leaked based projects. So it's our focus is investigative journalism, and which covers global stories. But as I was saying at the beginning, ICIJ exists since 1997. So we have a network of journalists who have worked with ICIJ in other like global projects at a small, like they were not as large as Panama, but like they covered like several countries. So what happens? First we did offshore leaks. So our director, Gerard, after investigating a big scandal in Australia, he gets this hard drive and then he gets this job at ICIJ, a big network. And then the first day, he arrives of investigative journalists all around, he said, well, you know, I have this hard drive. It has information about offshore information and all these countries. Can we do something about it with this network? And suddenly it came offshore leaks, and it was about more than 100 journalists. And that changed the game, because before that, we had projects that were global, but not at that scale. So that was the first project we had with more than 100 journalists working together. And we didn't have the technologies we had afterwards. So we explored those documents, and then people saw, oh, well, actually, yes, we can work together at this scale. So what happened next? Then Le Monde gets a leak, which is Swiss leaks. And they say, who should I go to? How do I work with this? So they had the experience of offshore leaks, and then they contact ICIJ. Same happened when Bastian and Frederik Obermeier from Süddeutsche, they got this massive amount of information, and they saw, oh, well, if we cover it, then, yeah, there would be some stories that could be lost. But on the other hand, they already knew the model and the impact it could have. So then instead of being lone wolves and making that their life career, they said, let's go to ICIJ. And then we had, again, more than 380 journalists, and that, I think, changed the game.
And how was that to bring, you said earlier, startup portals and startup journalists together with big tankers like here in Germany, die Deutsche Zeitung?
Well, it's a fascinating experience, because then you discover it's not only the media, it's the journalists themselves. So, because some of those journalists, as I said, they used to work for traditionally big media in their countries. The game changed, and then they did want to continue doing journalism at that standard, going beyond the news, going beyond the facts, and just investigating, connecting the dots, and working at a global scale and in a more in-depth and advanced way, and covering corruption in some of the countries. And it's interesting, because this model also helps journalists reporting under very complex circumstances, because we had partners that, when you look at the Panama Papers, we had partners working in Russia. We had partners working all across Latin America. And if you look at the Free Press Index, yes, there could be risks. But working as a network and going out as a global collaboration helps journalists not going out alone. And that strengthens the capacity of every journalist in all around the world. And it's working with peers. They're not working with BBC or Süddeutsche or with Zipper or El Faro. They are working with Bastian, and they're working with Frederick, and they are working with Monica, and all the journalists who are part of this network, which makes a huge difference.
Vice Minister, listening to all this, this marvelous background, how do you assure freedom of press and the work of journalists in your country?
Sí, muchas gracias.
Before answering your question, I'd like to emphasize a little bit and come back to the partner from Somalia, if you allow me. It has to do with also tracking information until a certain level. I do not know whether actually we can talk about a kind of media war, but lots of times when you see, in fact, that some information appears which has to do with one country or another country, which you know. So, and if you see that this information has been disseminated by a medium which is responsible medium, then you're wondering the question which I'm wondering, whether we are facing maybe a media war, because sometimes we journalists and communication media contribute to this difference of the, for example, credibility of information. And the case which you mentioned about the appearance of negative images, this does not only happen in your country, but it's a generalized phenomenon. And often a medium, you find, for example, piece of information in some medium information about your country, and the image is from the 60s or 70s, and you're wondering what's going on there. And therefore, I was talking that we are turning a little bit lazy in some way or the other, using this modern media, and we are forgetting these kind of working styles, the traditional ways of working. For example, in order to have verified information, you have to track this, you have also to make, for example, also on-site investigation, and in this field we have to work a lot in order to fight against disequalities. And referring to the freedom of press in a country, well, actually we are carrying out a lot of work here in this field. I do not want to say that everything is perfectly realized, but we are doing a lot in order to achieve this freedom of press, of expression, of opinion, and we are working now in the updating of the, for example, law on media and social media, and we think that certain components are not now they not up to date. For example, the admission of media and so on. And in our country, we have now currently, independently from the governmental media, we have private TV, for example, private radio. We have 40 independent magazines, journals, or newspapers, right? And we have approved a subvention as government, subsidies for the press, or economic subsidies, and do not apply, for example, the control of information or of these media, but it's just an economic support in order that they can carry out their job, because we have found that some of these private mediums have economic problems, and therefore the government has created an annual subsidy for these media in order that they can carry out their daily work. And this implies that, on the other hand, this government does not intervene in any moment in the information which is disseminated on a daily form. They do not, for example, carry out any censorship or the way how they investigate. And I want to say just that we are progressing a lot, referring to the freedom of press and opinion, referring to the communication media. So, Mr. Tema is
media. I would like to ask all of you, what do you think, what should mainstream media much more focus on now these days? What are the underreported issues? Abdi Hakim, maybe.
I think the mainstream media has really, underreported, countries that still going through some difficult time. So mainly on the political and socio-economic of that country. So I think it's very important that the mainstream media should take a or do a story from different perspective rather than one side of the perspective. Can
you give us an example, maybe?
Well, I don't know if I think you're always familiar with the danger of a single story, which is only focusing on one story and leaving the other side, because of one side of the story fits only your own narrative and your own your own agenda or objective. So I think it's time to broaden the horizons of the media, of the coverage, and having a very fair and impartial look rather than focusing on one niche and feedback. But also, I think the people, especially governments, have a role to play here in actually promoting the way information is being disseminated or shared with the mainstream media, because the mainstream media usually they carry the stories that have the most interest to their public audience. They wouldn't go stories that do not have any interest to their media to their audience. So I would say both the government and also as well as civil society should definitely step up to the plate and play a role in ensuring that they stories are being told by the local peoples rather than by the outsides, and this is exactly the thing that we definitely need to do.
Emily,
yeah, perhaps I might sound biased, but I think in this case, mainstream media should invest more and more in investigative journalism. Investigative journalism, well, just because I'm an investigative journalist. But you see that investigative journalism actually goes beyond the public agenda, like the agenda that you get sold every day by governments, by officials, and questions what is going on in the roots of society. And it can cover any topic. So that helps media have their own independent agenda. And it's not like the media being told what is the story that you need to tell. So it's exploring what is going on in society, what is going wrong, and what are the stories we need to tell. And that actually changes. And like if you want to know like motives, so like why do you need to invest more in investigative journalism, you can see the impact. We did a survey among all our more than 300 partners when
I'm curious.
Which is 300 journalists, 100 media partners, and the level of impact they had, like audience wise, like it was historical records, even for The Guardian, BBC, Süddeutsche, but also the startups, the small startups, they had records in audience, not for one day, for months. And that is like at the level of like, why should you invest like internally? It brings you, the audience to you. You are the one who is telling a different story. And then on the other hand, when you see the impact in society, like I already mentioned the example of Iceland, but we counted, like we had more than 1,000 stories published over 1 year all around the world, like with our media partners. But then there were hundreds of investigations open in more than 76 countries, I think, when we did that last count. Money recovered by governments after they initiated their own investigations based on the results of the stories published by journalists. Recently, the offshore firm like just closed operations, the Mossack Fonseca, which was the one that was providing services to create the offshore companies. And then Sharif also had to leave office. Like it was not only one prime minister. So, and then society, like the biggest impact was in society. There was a biggest change in like how society perceived these topics. And no one was telling them, oh, this is what you should cover. And if you saw like probably what governments were doing while we were investigating, the topic was not on the agenda. Now, like you see European Parliament also discussing legislation about offshore. So then you have high impact and your audience engaged, but also then other actors in society play their role. So I think it's important that we invest more and more on investigative journalism.
Just because I'm very curious, where do we stand, just briefly, at this point after the Panama Papers have been published? You just mentioned Fonseca, the law firm has to shut down operations.
Yes.
Where do we stand here legally?
No, well, legally it changes country by country, but like there are ongoing investigations all around the world. So it's not like a European story or like an American story, it's a global story. So you see investigations, like I know like Colombia recovered money, millions of dollars after like their tax authorities started investigating. We also published a database that allowed people, like, because we only work with journalists. So, but we made a service of like, okay, like let's publish a database where you can actually see, like, which would be like what you would find in any corporate record, like should be open, like companies and shareholders in offshore jurisdictions. And actually that has generated independent investigations, and like other journalists who just based on that did their own investigations. But we know that like civil society has also used that, like they independently. But you see like the impact is still ongoing, like everywhere. We're still contacted by journalists who are finding new leads. And we just recently launched a new project on West Africa that involved 13 journalists, more than 13 journalists in 13 countries in West Africa, that combine an investigation of all the leaks we have had, because we felt that that region was still like needed more reporting. So we involved local journalists, and we just launched news stories that connected with that region.
Fabienne, again, our title is Underreported, Showing and Challenging Inequalities in the Media. At which point, where are we blind as representatives of mass media?
Yeah, first of all, I think we should stop calling it mainstream media. I don't know, maybe it's very German, but I don't like the term at all. But what is the mainstream media? I think we don't have a mainstream media here in Germany. We have multiple medias and multiple point of views in all the media. But I think what we really should focus on and work on is on the question how to reach our audience, and not only preach to the converted, not only make programs for people who watch TV already and watch our programs already, but how can we not only tell good stories, but how can we make that these stories are heard? So.
But in particular, what do you think are stories in a rich country, in a rich society like this here, that are underreported?
Oh, that's a huge question. I mean, I cannot tell you like what stories are underreported. I can tell you that I think that we don't, in a rich country like Germany, we don't think about inequality enough, and we don't think about inequality of chances enough, and I think that's the main issue, still the main issue, and we should really think about how to tell this story, because it's a very abstract topic, and it's not very easy to find a lot of interesting stories. Some stories are very boring, so you have to make it not boring, and I think that's the main challenge that we focus right now.
Before we continue, are there any questions in the room? Ah, okay. Just go ahead, please. Yes. Is there a microphone? How does that work? Need one from here.
Oh, because there's the online.
Thank you. So I have a question to Fabienne, actually, but maybe also to everyone else. It's about perspectives and audiences. So like when we say we don't think about it or we don't talk about it in a rich country like Germany, I think that's already where it starts to become a bit controversial, because who's we? And but I want to say I loved all the Docupy clips, actually. I watched, I think, all of them, and especially the one with the school kids that you talked about earlier. I found it really, really great to see, and a great way of showing how inequalities already affect also very young people in a rich country like Germany. Yeah, so, but then on the other hand, I thought, is it actually appropriate for me to give it so much praise? Because yes, there are issues of class, of education and so on that are definitely underreported, but on the other hand, they are painfully real for many, many people in this country. So for them, I wonder what's actually the benefit. Will they think, yes, it's great to see my realities reflected in the media, but that's nothing new. Like, what's the news in this? I feel this on a daily basis. So I wondered if the benefit was actually for a smaller group who was kind of ignorant before or actually didn't know. And that leads, sorry, it's multiple questions actually. And that leads me to, just last one, leads me to the thought of what do we want to achieve by reporting underreported stories? So what are we aspiring to achieve with that? What comes after the reporting?
Fabienne, do you want to answer?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for your feedback, the positive feedback. What's the benefit? We went, for instance, we went for the documentary on inequalities of life chances. We went to a school, a public school in Neukölln in Berlin, which is an underprivileged area in Berlin. And everybody knows about the schools over there, that they have problems, and we were like, yeah, okay, so we gotta do it another time, and everybody would say like, yeah, okay, again and again, and nothing changed. But what I experienced there was that they still are very thankful to have a voice and to take place and to take part of that, to speak out their own opinions about it, and to have their own voice, and they don't want that other people talk about them. They want to talk themselves. So I think for them it's very important to have that voice and to not be forgotten. I think that's really a main thing of that inequality discussion. We forget them. And I think we should do everything to not forget them and to take them seriously and to give them a voice. And what I realized as well is we talked about inequalities of gender as well. We went to the parliament in Berlin, to the Bundestag, and asked the female politicians over there if they felt equal to their male colleagues over there. And I realized that movements like Me Too or debates that we have at the moment, they really change something, because almost all the female politicians talked to us. They wanted to share their story, and they wanted to share their Me Too moments and what they experienced. And I did a similar research 2 years ago, and all these women, they talked to me, but they would never ever say it on camera. 2 years later, we have the Me Too discussion all over the world, and suddenly women speak up. So suddenly they feel encouraged and they want to talk about their own inequality, and they want to talk about it and they want to change something. And I really believe that this has an impact, and we make a difference by reporting the underreported.
Thank you very much, Fabienne. There's another question over there.
Thank you very much. My name is Wella Sherlita. I'm from Jakarta, Indonesia. And you guys in Europe are still facing the issue of refugees and migrants, right? My question is it still considered as underreported stories? The second is, if the story is about migrant and refugees issues, not the hard news, but in-depth stories, so how the audience responded that story, and how do German media deliver the stories, in-depth stories about refugees and migrant crisis? In Indonesia, we're still also facing the same thing, reporting the story of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar, and sometimes I'm wondering about how to respond, how to make the stories that make our audience pay more sympathy or empathy towards the condition of the Rohingyas people in Indonesia. So how do you guys deliver the stories, in-depth stories about refugees in Europe, especially in Germany? Thank you.
Fabienne, do you want to answer that question as well?
Yeah, we didn't especially talk about refugees in our movies, but refugees often go, kids of refugees often go to schools in underprivileged areas. So we talked about it, but not especially, not with a focus on refugees. I work usually I work for a political program. It's called Panorama. It's a program for the IID as well. And we always face that problem. How can we create empathy, and how can we talk to people who, because Germany is very, how do you call it, very torn, actually. There are people who are very much against refugees, and then there are people who are very much not pro-refugees, you cannot say that, but they want to help them, and they want to be open, they want to stay open-minded. And this is the main issue for us at the moment. Like, how can we tell the stories to reach people? And I cannot give you one answer. I think we can have a chat outside, and it would take hours. But there's no answer right now. But it's a huge issue for us and a huge challenge to still create empathy.
But does the audience respond positively or negatively about the story of refugees? Does the audience?
There was in our in Doccupy, we didn't treat refugees as a one subject, but and you cannot say, does the audience react like this or like that? I didn't make any studies on how the audience reacted on that, so I cannot say something. I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question properly.
Are there more questions for now? If not, yeah, here you go, please. Microphone.
I have a question to the minister from Equatorial Guinea. I mean, according to the ranking list of the organization Reporters Without Borders, which is giving a ranking list on the press freedom of all countries worldwide every year, your country is ranking number 171 out of 180 countries. And such a bad ranking is contradicting your statement about the situation of the media in your country. So could you comment on that?
Muchas gracias. Pues,
thank you for your question.
Hay datos,
there is a lot of data. There is a lot of things that have to be actualized, that have to be updated. They have to be regularly updated. And as I already said before, a lot of times we have never seen any member of Reporters Without Frontiers in our country. I have never spoken to them. This is why it is important that these people do their research in situ, so that they know exactly what is happening in the countries. As far as I am informed, I have never welcomed a delegation of Reporters Without Borders, because see, what happens is behind all information there are certain interests. We have spoken about media that diffuse information because they have to talk about a certain story, because they're going to get money for that, and because it is important for them to portray a certain image, a distorted image. And they know that if they produce those images, they're going to have to get more money for their reporting. But what you need is these people to come in situ, to come to the country and to see and verify what is happening in the country, in situ. I'm not saying that we are doing absolutely well already. But this ranking probably is a very old ranking. And if the members of this organization could come to Guinea, Equatorial Guinea, they would probably have a very different view and a very different ranking. Este es un ranking de 2017.
What do you want to do to improve that situation? What do you want to do to get a better ranking next year from Reporters Without Borders?
El próximo año de los Reporteros Sin Fronteras. This is exactly what I was trying to say. We have to really try to invite these people to our country so that they can investigate, so that they can do the research in situ. And this is what I already said before. We are working a lot in situ. We have come out of a monopolized system. Now we have a very plural system. We even have even the political parties have their own newspapers. They have their own television channels even. Something that did not happen before. We have NGOs that have their own newspapers, that have published their own magazines. We have 40 different communication means. Written means press, and they are published periodically. Some are weekly papers, some are published every month or every 2 months. So what we need is a delegation of these Reporters Without Borders, so that they can see how exactly the communication means are working in Ecuador.
I think we can discuss the methods of Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index all day. I met some of them board. It's quite useful in countries for media to deploy against the government when it obviously goes down. But my question is, the panel is showing and challenging inequalities in the media, but when you work with smaller communities, people who are not being reported on, usually it's a resource-heavy reporting, especially I'm from Mongolia. I'm representing Mongolia Center for Investigative Journalism and Mongol TV. So in particular, if you have to go far, you need the resources, you need a fixer, you need a car, you need gas, and it's going to be expensive. And you need to justify with your publisher or whoever is funding that investigation or that report, or to your audiences to make sure that this report continues on. So I was talking to I'm just throwing an idea out there and to see what the panel thinks, is that I was talking to friends at DW that maybe in investigative journalism, I'm seeing more and more networks like OCCRP and IJ Friends are trying to measure their impact better. How much money did we get back into countries? Did we change jurisdiction, law, rules? Because we have to continue to tell our work and promote our work and saying, we need the $4 million from the funders because we got $4 billion back into the country, and you know where I'm going with this. So my question is, we had an interesting idea with the DW team that investigative journalism, side by side with the academia, who follow your investigation and have a measured impact of your work. so that after your report comes out, the public is usually divided and they try to characterize you, or they say it's, you know, it's ill-motivated. Then you have an academic, you know, people who are independent, who says that because of this report, this marginalized community got this much better. You know what I'm saying? Do you know any good, like, newsrooms we have to start recording our impact. Do you know any good cases that you have crossed in South America or, you know, in Germany, in EU, that seems to be working?
Emilia, please.
Well, I think it's a combination. One thing is the impact, the other is the sustainability, because you're also addressing the topic of funding, no? Like how do we make this sustainable? So on the impact front, yes, it helps tracing, and I think there are things that you can measure immediately, and the impact is on one side, like, yeah, how does a community change? Are there new public policies? Is there money recovered, in our case, like after investigations? But also, for instance, impact in the media itself, like are new media outlets growing? Like, have we raised the standards in journalism? How many journalists are being trained? But sometimes, like, it's not only about the number. It's also about the change and like the way things are perceived. And talking about sustainability, we're just launching a new initiative which is called, which looks for the audience to give $1, $10, and it's called Insiders. So everyone, like, and the audience, and we're asking them, okay, we're launching this campaign. If you believe in our work, like, you can support us. That helps us going also out of the, like, only one model of funding. And actually, it has been really interesting, the kind of answers we have received since we launched it, I think, like last week. Because people are just like giving $1 or $10 and saying, well, I can't afford giving more, but I believe in the work you do. So then that's another way of measuring impact, like the kind, like the support you can get from your own audience when they tell you the kind of stories, like they are liking your stories and then they support they support your model. I know there's not one unique answer. I think you just need to be good at measuring, because the audience also likes to see, after you have published a story, what happened next, no? So, and we are keeping that effort, like, to try to document it more, but also tell the stories, interview the people, and if they are affected. But I think it's a combination, that plus also then how you make your models sustainable. And sometimes it's there are media that come out through academia too, like we know some examples in Latin America, and they are supported by the academia, and then they have their independent investigative center. Sometimes it's nonprofit, sometimes it's audience-based. So it's a combination. Like, the key is that you remain independent. Like, that it doesn't matter. Like you need to get funding, but it needs to be diverse, and it doesn't need, like, it allows you to remain independent. It doesn't put you. It doesn't force you to cover X, Y, or Z. Like, as long as whatever you get, like, it comes from, like, of course, clean sources, allows you to continue doing your work without someone forcing you to do A or B.
Fabienne, what have you learned in the course of Docupy by the reaction of the audience?
I learned that it helps a lot to reach people when you're not dogmatic, when you don't, when you kind of show that you're open-minded as a journalist, that you what you said, not only one story, because that's the good story, that's the interesting story, because we kind of have this tunnel view. We have to forget about the tunnel view. And I think what I realized, or what we realized as a team, is that it really helps not to be dogmatic, and that the audience really appreciates it, because this allows us open a discussion about it, because people, they don't feel offended when they don't have the same opinion, or if they see if they have a total other perspective, if they see it differently. And when we look at riot and on the right side and on the left side, and not only the tunnel, I think we really make a debate and a discussion more possible, and this is something that I learned, and I really hope that it will go on, and that we go on discussing it, and that we talk to each other, and not that we are not that torn and not that divided into people who see it like this and to see it like that. That we have to discuss.
That's a very nice word to sum up our discussion here on the panel. In case there are no more questions on the table, I would like to thank you for coming and end this session. Thank you very much for your interest. Thank you towards the audience in the internet worldwide. Thank you for watching, and I hope you can enjoy the next moments and sessions here during the Global Media Forum until tomorrow. Thanks so much indeed. Thank you, Vice Minister Emilia. Thank you very much, Fabienne, Abdelhakim. Thank you very much indeed for coming.